Thank you for listening to the Gilman Woolsey podcast. This is episode number 9. Today we are speaking with a friend of mine from Norway. It's actually a very interesting conversation about what's gone on over there, as well as some of the perspectives going on around the world. Just a small note here, it did get slightly political at the end, which we try to avoid, which you can skip over, but we try to keep the conversations honest and unedited so that we're not trying to control the conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, today I have Arun Siva, who is a friend of mine who lives over in Norway with us. He is involved in business management, supply chain, and logistics. And so we're going to have him on today talking about what's going on over in Norway and some discussion about what he sees as the problems going forward related to business, supply chains, and logistics. Hi, Arun. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Gilman. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So, give us a little bit of an update as far as what's going on, as far as quarantine, what the government's doing to try to control the coronavirus over there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The Norwegian government, or how we say in Norsk, the regjering, they actually reacted to this a little bit late. They weren't as swift and accurate with their protocol. They waited to see. It was as if they waited to see what the big dogs, meaning the UK, even after Brexit and especially Germany, what they were going to do. And the biggest problem with the Norwegian system at the time was prior to March 8th, there were a lot of Chinese tourists, and actually some of them were from Wuhan that came to visit the Northern Lights. There's a city that I just recently visited 2 weeks in February called Tromsø, which is the northernmost. It's the largest city in northern Norway, and it's very famous this time of year for the Northern Lights and the Aurora Borealis and everything. And there's a lot of tourists. And lately, the last 3-4 years, most of the tourists have come from China. So with that being said, there's also that coupled with the fact that there were a lot of Norwegians that visited Italy, especially when Italy first discovered and exposed the outbreak, which was like the biggest issue here in Central Europe and Western Europe. And a lot of Norwegians came back from Italy from vacation. A lot of Norwegians usually go to one of 4 places during the colder months: Spain, Italy, sometimes the Alps, and of course Greece and Turkey. So, with that being said, there was also a lot of Norwegians that didn't know that they had the virus that brought it back also. So it was kind of like a very late screening. And then once the death toll started increasing in Italy and in other parts of Europe, then the Norwegian government said, okay, we need to be completely locked down. And I think it was about 10 days ago where they completely locked down the country, which includes no schools, colleges, universities are to be open, as well as many government offices. And yeah, I mean, it just it was a little bit delayed, but the protocol and the implemented plan of attack and plan of action from the sitting government was immediate, and it was to the fullest. They haven't had this much martial law, so to speak, since the Second World War. And people, yeah, people, how do you say, they're half the people agree with it and the other half disagree with it.
Right. And
But yeah, go ahead, sir.
I'm just curious because, over here in the United States, we've taken some action. I think that it's inadequate based on the experience that we're seeing in other countries overseas. In Norway, what do you think was the tipping point that led the government to actually take the full-on kind of draconian, drastic action that they did?
That's the best word that you could use to describe how they took it, draconian. But I think what it was when it started. I think one of the cases was a young person. We don't know if it was a male or a female, but we do know it was under the age of 25. and we do now know that the especially 2 weeks ago, the amount of cases doubled, and the head the most famous, the largest hospital in Norway is in Oslo, which is obviously the capital, which gets a lot of press and publicity. But the first reported case was in Tromsø, which is what I explained a little bit earlier. So that didn't matter because they thought, okay, it was one case, it was isolated, it's up in the north, it's sparsely populated, they can control it. An individual was quarantined. But when it started appearing twofold in Oslo and also in, for example, Bergen, but I think what really was the tipping point was Oslo, and that's where the parliament resides. That's where, a lot of these people, a lot of the prominent politicians are based there, obviously. And they decided, okay, this looks like it can be disastrous. And with that being said, we are going to implement this full, complete lockdown of the country. And after that, they started. There's press conferences every single day between the Secretary of Justice as well as the Secretary of Health, the Minister of Health, I think, and also the Minister of the State Minister, and also the Finance Minister. And because there was a little bit of political backlash earlier this year, one of the main parties actually just left the government, the extreme right party called FRP. They just said they just left the government. There were new people put in relatively short period of time, and that person, has been thrown into this situation now with this virus. So yeah, it's been a lot of disconnect. I think the lack of information, it just doesn't affect Norway. It affects every country, even in the U.S. probably. But now we're with social media and with still conventional communications like radio and newspapers. Norway still has a fair share of its population which still utilizes newspapers, believe it or not. And a lot of the information is conveyed that way. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. And this is something Jackie and I have actually been talking about a tremendous amount over here, is that I really don't think that America is going to take it seriously until we have a famous person or someone that's well known that gets the illness that actually ends up dying, and that person will become the face of the illness. And just like kind of happened in Norway when this 25-year-old person, died, all of a sudden it's going to become very real and very visceral to people that this is a real thing. It's not just this abstract concept that people get sick and that people die. They're going to see it as, this is someone that we know. This is someone that is in the collective conscious of the society. They're now gone from this disease. Oh my gosh, we need to take this seriously. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I still keep in touch with a lot of my buds in America, and I see people that still go into nightclubs and beaches, regardless of the curfew, regardless of what was recommended. I will say here, though, the first case of the person that died was obviously an elderly person. I think it was late 50s or early 60s. That was the first case that actually passed away. But there hasn't been a lot of fatalities here, but there have been a lot of they've been in critical care, critical condition, and those range from 18 to 69, from what I last heard. But I do think there were people here that also joked about it when they first heard about it in late February. There were a lot of people who were like, "Oh, it's just a passing thing. We're very strong. We've had people say, "Oh, we're descendants of Vikings. This won't affect us." And now it's like, no, this will affect everybody. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. What really matters, obviously, is your immune system and how strong it is and how you build it up. And fortunately, with Norway, I can tell you right now, they're probably one of the best countries in the world for taking care, having a safety net for these type of issues. So they've had several processes, especially with the health sector. They've really done a good job. They've gone out of their way to after the delay and reacting to it initially, once they did the mandate, the health sector's been gung ho. I mean, they've been testing everybody at the airports. They're willing to come to you if you're unsure that you have, if you have the early flu-like symptoms that could potentially lead to COVID. They send out people to you. They're doing all these different measures because Norway, much like Italy, has a very relatively high aged populace. I want to say a little more than half of the country's population is over 50. So they're taking they've been taking it very, very seriously because of the amount of pensioners that we call it here, pensionistas here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, it was a little bit late to the table, but I actually agree with a lot of the programs and plans that they've implemented. Yes, obviously businesses are suffering, but the good thing is the Norwegian government has issued out a stimulus plan for 100 billion kroners, which is quite a lot of money. Nowhere near 100 billion US, but it's a substantial amount of money to help the small businesses, just for businesses actually, and they're going to set aside that money and they're going to try to redistribute it to help businesses here in Norway. With that being said, though, it's very, very competitive. It's very, very difficult to sustain a business in Norway. You have to be good. You have to do things right. There's a certain way. It's not easy like in America, but it's not too difficult like in even other European countries. Norway is kind of in the middle because they're not a member of the EU, but that's debatable now because they've been kind of trying to cater to Germany and Brussels, in that nature. But they're trying to find that balance, and it's very difficult when you only have 5.5 million people. There's a lot of there's a lot of room for improvement, but with what they have and what they've been doing, with the amount of money and from taxes that they collect, nothing short of impressive. I actually will say that there's a system here called the employment agency in Norway is called NAV, and it's kind of just like the U.S. Employment Bureau or the employment agency in the U.S. But the thing is here, if you get laid off, you get your full pay for quite a long period of time. And you have to just do some checks, obviously, but your employer submits the process and the paperwork so that obviously they won't foot the bill. They won't foot the bill. They'll turn it over to the state, and the state has plenty of money to take care of people that have been what's called here permittert or permittering, and that's kind of similar to like a furlough or a layoff, but you're getting your money. You're getting your money monthly. Usually in Norway, you get paid once a month, unless you have several jobs. But the most important thing that the government tackled was the economy, as well as public health and safety. And everything's been closed. All bars have been closed. All sporting events have been shut down, similar to the U.S., like how the NBA was shut down. But here, it was obviously earlier. And for example, a local pub that I visit in my neck of the woods here, they've been shut down 2 weeks now. The restaurants are only takeout. There's no more sitting in. The only stores that are open are the essentials, grocery stores, pharmacies, and hardware stores. A few of the shops in the malls, they had the opportunity to be open, but a lot of them actually just said, nope, I'm just going to stay at home. And now I think after the third week of this really becoming an issue, a lot of people are just staying home. They're staying put at home. The occasionally they'll go out for some fresh air. They'll go alone. They usually avoid groups of 3 or 4 plus people. But here in Norway, we have the luxury of having plenty of open space, unless you live in Oslo or Bergen. You have you do have sparsely populated areas for the most part. So,
yeah, well, I've had a lot of people asking me that, especially like my kids. They're like, can we go out and can we go hiking? Can we do this? And I keep telling them, I'm like, it's not that the air around you is infected, it's that there may be people around you that are infected. So as long as you're out in open spaces that have good distancing between people, it's not that big a deal. I actually want to go back for just a second and talk about something that I've been actually very concerned about happening in the United States, and it's the attitude towards testing. We're seeing this even from the federal government. Today, they're coming out and they're basically saying, we don't recommend that you test people unless you believe that the testing is going to change how you treat this person. In other words, even if you believe that the person is infected with the virus, you don't need to test them unless for some reason you would do something different. And I think personally that based on the experience of other countries, like you're describing in Norway, you guys have been very aggressive about testing. All the countries thus
Yeah,
far that have done well that we see, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea,
South
Norway,
Korea. Yeah,
all these places that have had an abatement of the actual illness themselves, they all have one thing in common, and it's that they test widely. And in addition to just knowing what the status of the person is, I think there's another huge benefit that I actually didn't think of. Someone pointed out to me, and it's social proof. It makes people take it seriously if people that you know and loved ones around you see getting infected, and all of a sudden it brings it home and it becomes personal, and it makes it so people will support these measures and these kind of harsh realities of businesses having to shut down and people having to stay home. Testing widely allows people to buy into the process a lot easier than if it's just, kind of this nebulous, it might be there, we don't really know. I mean, that knowledge is actually helpful to people being able to get on board with these things, because this is hard for everyone. I mean, it's hard for you, it's hard for me. I've lost many, many thousands of dollars already in revenue that I would have had otherwise related to this. And, it's just one of those things that you just have to accept. I mean, there's no way around it. So,
yeah, it's a shame, but I will say that Norway is better than the U.S., but I don't think that they're as disciplined as, for example, South Korea or Taiwan, because they're obviously in closer proximity to the source where this all stemmed from. I mean, it's debatable the U.S.'s involvement with the creation of this virus or wherever, but South Korea and Singapore and Taiwan, like you mentioned, have taken very, very extreme measures. And I've got friends here from Singapore and from, for example, South Korea, who are just waiting it out. They were supposed to go back, for example, 2 weeks ago or a week ago, but they canceled just because. But they did say that their families were routinely tested in South Korea. They don't play around over there. And I think, and going back to what you said with the testing, and the reason why Norway uh, uh, began to attack this so vehemently after a little bit of while was because per capita, though, after Italy, I think Norway was number two or number three, and that statistic really hit the government hard. So then that's why they began the aggressive plan of attack, because per capita, obviously, Norway having one of the lowest populations in Western Europe as well. It just didn't look good because of the number of tourists. Norwegians, they travel quite a lot. They got a lot of money. They got a lot of disposable income, so they travel in the colder months. And I think when in overnight, it doubled. The amount of cases went from like 150 to 400, if I'm not mistaken.
wow.
Approximately 10 days ago. So, after that, then the government was like, okay, folks, we gotta really buckle down and deal with this. And then they started testing people at the airport. So now they've done quarantines. If you come within the country, like if you've been in Oslo and you go to, for example, where I'm at right now, which is Trondheim, or if you go to Tromsø, at the airport there, they will ask you, okay, you're coming from Oslo. Were you visiting anywhere in Oslo? And then you have to be at home. You have to be at home quarantine for 2 weeks. You have
You're,
to sign a form
so you're saying just going between different areas within
in
Norway
Norway.
itself, they're still asking people to quarantine.
they make you, and I mean it's the honor system, and I would say here, which would never work in America, but in Norway, even in Germany, because my sister living in Germany, um, it's the same thing there. It's all the honor system, but the people here in Europe are a different breed. Most of them really do adhere to the policies. If you tell them they can't go out, they won't go out, and they will only go out for pharmaceutical or for groceries, and that's it. I don't think that would work in America. I would say maybe a maybe a certain type of the populace would, but from what I'm seeing in Twitter, saw I saw a video of a guy who's obviously ready for spring break, and he was like, "Well, if I get corona, I get corona. I'm still going to keep partying." I mean, that does not fly here in Norway, even though there are a lot of immature, college kids, for example. But when it came down to this situation, and nobody here messing around with that. There's no lack of common sense in this regard,
Yeah.
as opposed to what I've been hearing and what I've been seeing from my friends' feeds and stuff, regardless on social media or even on other mediums. But even in Italy, I've got a close friend, I've got a coworker here who's from Sicily, and he's been in Norway now for 2 years, and he was like, it's ridiculous. People are still not taking this seriously in the most affected country in Europe, which is Italy. So it says something about, I want to say something about the leadership or something about the people. I mean, you could say, you can tackle any of these different avenues. But going back to, I don't know why the U.S., we all know why the U.S., especially the health industry, is doing this, because it costs money. I don't understand why, and you would know this way more than anyone. You're definitely an expert on this, Gilman, is how the mismanagement of funds during emergency situations, especially in the health sector, it always is a factor. It's happened with SARS. It happens with H1N1. I mean, I don't understand. Where's the tie up, and why? I mean, does it really cost that much money per head, per case, to test for COVID in America?
Well,
I don't know.
I think a lot of the problem kind of boils back down to the multiple layers of bureaucracy that you see in the United States to administer healthcare. I mean, to get anything done in the United States, you have to get approval. It has to go through. Then there's like billing expenses and all sorts of other layers of administration. I actually, some time ago, I saw a graph. It was like since 1900, the number of administrators per physician to basically carry out healthcare in America. And back at the turn of the century, it was basically, there was like one administrator for every, I think it was like 1.5 or 2 doctors. And as I recall, the graph in 2017 or whatever it was, there was something on the order of 25 or 35 administrators per physician to administer healthcare, as crazy as that sounds. And granted, I don't know what they're calling, an administrator. I don't know what the classification was behind that, but, all these bodies, take up expense. The other problem in the U.S., I think, is the tremendous liability problem. And people don't understand how much of a problem liability really is in the United States. There's a tremendous amount of needless stuff that is done every single day because people are afraid of being sued. And the reason they're afraid of being sued is because it's very easy in hindsight to go back and to find something and say, if only you had identified this earlier, if only you had done something earlier about this. And an example I'll give you is pulmonary nodules. So I'm a radiologist. I read medical imaging. We read CTs every single day, and we see pulmonary nodules every single day. And a very small pulmonary nodule in a relatively young person, that is a relatively low risk thing. The problem is if you call that pulmonary nodule and you don't recommend for a follow-up CT and that person just happens to get cancer, you run the risk of being sued because you didn't recommend for, $10,000 worth of workup over the coming years. We have an inability in this country to look at statistics and say, you know what, if there's a 1 in a million chance that this is going to cause a problem, it is reasonable as a society to say that is a risk as a society we have to be willing to take. In the U.S., I think one of the big problems is we look at outcomes of one, not at outcomes for entire populations. And if that outcome
Mm.
isn't perfect, then we
Yeah.
expect, for the medical system or for the physicians or providers to pay for the lack of a good outcome. And I think that that's something that it's very hard to change, but it's something that has to change if we want to bring the cost of healthcare, both of those things, the administrative bureaucracy and the liability side, because device manufacturers are the same way. There's a tremendous amount of cost built into every medical device, into every product that you
Yeah.
buy on the medical scene, just to cover their liability exposure in the case that their device isn't perfect, because none of them are perfect. All of them are going to have problems, and they're going to have to deal with the liability. And so the cost is kind of,
Absolutely. And I've had,
distributed.
yeah, I agree. And also the insurance companies are really making this way more difficult than it is. And with the amount of money, so I can say from personal experience, I've had a rotten experience with the U.S. With the medical situation. I've had three separate instances, uh, and luckily here in Norway, even with all this, my procedure with my knee is still going to go through, and they still said, "Oh no, we're still going to help you. We're still going to operate." They're thinking about replacing my knee, and it's going to happen probably in April. But this was an old injury from firefighting from back in the day when I was a lot younger after military service. And the orthopedic surgeons. I was treated in Jersey at the time, of all places, and supposedly one of the best orthopedic outfits in the East Coast. It turns out being a big joke. The rehab was a joke. The surgeon, he only would spend 10, 15 minutes, and this was back in 2003, 4. Um, if we had questions or whatever, we really couldn't get any answers from him. It was really frustrating, and they did a horrible job. Um, Still haven't recovered fully. My kneecap still protrudes to the left. I don't have full 180 degrees of motion. I only have 140. So when I came here to Norway 2 years ago, I finally have a little bit of time now. I have plenty of time now because of everything being slow here. But I went to one of the best surgeons here, and we talked for 45 minutes. I mean, that never happens. I've never seen that in my life, and I'm sure that's because of the low population. But spending 45 minutes, almost an hour, talking to two different surgeons, really thorough, really, it's just a whole nother ballgame here. And I know it can't be replicated. And I don't really talk politics at all, but the election coming up and all, you cannot reciprocate or replicate the system in Scandinavia with that in America. There's way too many people, way too much corruption, way too much bureaucracy, like you just pointed out. You hit the nail right on the head. I mean, that there is bureaucracy here as well in Scandinavia, but it's not. It's none of this petty things. It's none of this petty stuff. Here they're very, very efficient. You don't have, like you said, the amount of administrators per doctor or whatever per unit. You don't have time for that here. It's all highly qualified people. And they don't work a lot like in America. In America, they work 50, 60, 80 hours a week. But how much real work do they do? Maybe 40, 45. But here, they work 37 and a half hours. You're gonna get 37 and a half. There's no doubts about it. In my experience working in my field here, the people here are very, very efficient with their time. Sometimes they'll just work through their breaks, just so that they can get to go home early. The work-life balance here is really wonderful. But in terms of like the medical care, there have been two separate instances where I should have sued the doctors and the surgeons in America. Especially with my knee, my leg, affecting my quality of life for a couple of years. And then there was another instance, where they could have done a simple blood test, because my appendix ruptured when I came back from, Fort Bragg in North Carolina. My appendix had ruptured before I went to Arizona and came back. I was visiting, my parents, my mom, in the summer, and my appendix ruptured. I didn't really feel anything, but I went to the general med, the general physician, and he just gave me some over the counter stuff. He told me to just do the. He thought it was constipation, whatever. A simple blood test would would have shown that, because I got on a plane and went to, I think Chicago it was, and it got even worse when I went on that high altitude. So I was walking around for 2 weeks with a ruptured appendix, and then only until I got into Northwestern University Medical Center, the gastroenterologist there did a great job and literally brought me back from the dead. And and that's what I don't understand. I understand the U.S. is a country, you get what you pay for in terms of medical care, but it didn't even matter. At this point, with the decent insurance that we had, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
They dropped the ball, and then here they don't do that. There's way less malpractice, even in Germany, and I can attest to that in Germany. I don't know about the other countries like Italy or France, but I do know when it comes to Scandinavia and Germany, it's top notch. It's really top notch, and the Netherlands as well. The U.S. can really learn something, but knowing how things are, I think the people in the system itself, the barriers of entry, like you said, very, very high for a reason, so that they can inflate drug costs. I mean, you don't see any of that here. You don't have any of that nonsense here. The FDA or whatever. I mean, yeah, European companies adhere to some of the FDA standards and all that, but I mean, this price gouging, saline, the markup on saline, for example, the markups on EpiPen, for example, or any of these kind of common drugs. I mean, there's none of that. There's none of that nonsense in Europe,
Well,
and it's really sad. Like you said, when you stop and reflect upon it, especially you being a radiologist in the sector. I mean, it's got to be awful.
Yeah, and as tragic as all this is, and we're predicting. I mean, it's almost not even a prediction. All you have to do is look at Italy and what their experience is, because the United States and the way we are acting is so close to Italy, and the similarities are so striking that, I mean, it's almost just patently obvious what's going to happen. But the silver lining in all of this, if there can be a silver lining, is that there's so much red tape and bureaucracy right now, but in the name of emergency, a lot of that red tape and bureaucracy is being literally dissolved overnight. And, the FDA is talking about trying chloroquine on patients, for this. Granted, I mean, chloroquine isn't an experimental drug really, because it's used for other stuff. So it's been tested. It's known to be safe. The question is it effective? And it's a little different than taking, say, a new vaccine that's never been tried on people and giving it to them, because you don't know if that vaccine is going to kill them or cause some sort of problem.
Yeah.
But even then, right now, the FDA in Seattle, they're injecting people with this vaccine that has very little background testing to it, because they're that desperate, to get stuff out there. But I'm really hoping that once all of this goes away, which is probably, my estimation and what I'm seeing other people estimate is probably a year to 2 years before we get through this pandemic, that a lot of that red tape that had been cut through in the name of efficiency, that it doesn't just come right back and crush the system, that we've already created. One other question I had for you, quick, is going to Norway as a foreigner, how long did it take you to get healthcare coverage there? Was it immediate, or was there some sort of delay? In other words, are they protective of their system from outside people coming in? Because in the U.S., obviously, with illegal immigration and stuff, that's been something that's been a concern here.
Yeah, emigrating with an E is very, very difficult in Norway, and it's actually, this is a topic for another day. But with this virus and the sitting government that we have now, they're just going to ride the coattails of this and not allow anybody in. So there's only 4 or 5 permits that Norway offers, as opposed to the U.S. You have a spousal one. You have a work permit or a skilled workers permit, and obviously if you're a refugee or an asylum seeker, but those are pretty much diminished now, way out of the question because of all the other problems stemming from that. And the other one is a family reunification, which is, these are all, and of course a student permit, and they're all equally cumbersome. But if you qualify for any of these permits, then you are immediately entered into the national health system. Now it varies. If you're, I know the students coming from non-EU countries, they've had a little bit of uncertainty. They've had a little bit of a rougher road, but eventually they would get on the national health circuit, and it would take maybe anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months is the worst case scenario. But for the most part, for me, it was literally in 2 weeks. When I set foot here, September 2018, I was able to get my GP, and yeah, I got my little card or my little flyer, confirmation letter in the mail, and it was good. It was golden. So for me, it was very, very fortunate. But things are changing now.
Yeah.
With the rise in nationalism, especially in Denmark and Norway. Sweden's a little different. Things are going to get very, very tight and strict. So I think I've been very, very fortunate and lucky with the time period. I've emigrating here.
Yeah, you touch on something that's really interesting to me, and this is something that Jackie and I have actually been talking a tremendous amount about for the last week or so, and it's the or them versus us mentality. That up until a month ago, we were moving towards this: we are one, we are the world, we are this, and you're starting to see this contracture where people are pulling back. They're like, we are Ireland, we are Norway, even the US, we are the US. Like, I don't know if you saw this or not, but just a day or two ago, Trump basically announced that they were taking all the illegal immigrants and they were sending them all back to their countries of origin. And we heard, at least I didn't, I haven't heard a whimper from the media about that. 3 weeks ago,
Yeah,
there would have been an outrage with protests and all this stuff. And literally,
absolutely. Absolutely.
overnight, all of a sudden people are like, makes sense. Like we can't support our own, we can't support others as well. And I just see that the world is going to contract and nationalism is going to be massively on the rise. And I think that globalism is actually going to see a big decline.
And I'm not going to sit here and say I agree with it, but my views are totally different with the U.S. Number one, I don't follow any of the media. It's really a big circus act, and I really want to enlighten people to avoid the media because they're really stirring the pot and doing what they're supposed to do, I guess, if that makes any sense. And number two, if anything, the U.S. and the U.K. are two countries that need to take in more of these the problems because they in some way, shape, or form have created most of the world's problems. I mean, that's not up for debate at all. But I have a problem when the UK and the US says, "Oh, we have problems with refugees." Illegal immigrants is another ballgame, like you said. That's debatable. I mean, the law is the law. I totally understand and get it. But when it comes to refugees, like countries like Norway and Sweden and Denmark and even Germany. I mean, Germany's already repented for what their actions have been. But countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, for example, I don't know why they're taking in these types of people. And then there's a big debate, and that's the biggest reason for the rise in nationalism. And countries like Poland and Slovakia and Slovenia are up on the rise now, and they've always been kind of true to their identity. And the EU, because they're members of the EU and Brussels just kept threatening them about not taking in refugees, not taking in forced assimilation of certain ethnic groups. And these countries are like, no, back off. We don't want anything to do with it. And then now they're thinking about leaving. Some of them Hungary and Poland. Who knows what will happen? But it's potentially the case that they may leave the EU as well. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing now, like you said, Gilman, is this shift. This shift of globalism is not good, and I know more about this because it affects my business. A lot of my clients that are from the U.S. and the U.K. and from other well-developed nations in the world they came out and sought to me, and they wanted to shift their production and their manufacturing to China. And I would always engage with them and give them other possibilities of other countries. And now I think because of this virus and because of what you said, the rise of nationalism, countries trying to be more self-sufficient, trying to have their own identity. Who knows what's going to happen? I think, will it help? Will it bring back some of those jobs, or that were outsourced to these type of places? And what will it do with the people emigrating from one country to another? Because borders are closed. All the borders in the EU are closed. You can't fly in or get out unless you are a citizen or a permanent resident, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And if the flights even go, 90% of, for example, Scandinavian airline flights have been canceled. Norwegian Air, KLM out of Holland or Amsterdam. Most of these flights are canceled, and with the borders being shut down, there's no more. I'm sure refugees are still trying to come, but the media won't, like you said, they won't report or care about it. So it's going to be really interesting to see in the next few months how this all turns around, because there's a lot of countries that are really frustrated, and the whole "we are united, we are one" it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And Brexit really opened that can of worms up.
Right.
And there's other countries that are following, that are willing to threaten and follow Britain's footsteps. And it's all just the money game, Britain, now they're going to try to see. It's going to be really interesting how the tariff structure and the VATs work, and how much money Britain's going to try to extort from the other European Union countries. And it's just going to be really crazy.
Yeah.
And the EU was a great idea once upon a time, but it really didn't take into effect. You can't take into effect when you're designing a concept as complex as a union, a block of nations under one rule, one treaty, one type of regimen, one type of system. When you're counting so many different languages, cultures, different types of people, different economies, the economy of Germany is like it's 10 times greater than the economy of, for example, like Portugal or Greece, for example. Mm-hmm. And you have this situation where it's always going to be a power struggle, and the people that are bringing the most to the table are going to demand more. They're going to lobby, and they're going to get more. And what it felt like was Britain was losing that battle with Germany at Brussels, and that's what happened with Brexit. The self-identity, the self-proclamation. Hey, we're going to do this on our own. We don't agree. We're going to get out, and it was a cakewalk for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, and that there's some value to cohesiveness too. Like I think that's one thing that we've really lost in the United States with, it's nice having variable opinions and stuff, but especially in the last, say, 5 to 6 years in the U.S., you've seen a complete breakdown of cohesiveness between people. And, it's thus and them. You're Democrat, you're Republican, you're this or you're that. And countries over in the European Union, the thing is they still have a very distinct culture that they've maintained for the most part, from what I understand. And I think that in times of trial, that cohesiveness and being able to come together with like a common base, a common understanding has a tremendous amount of value. And I think going forward, you're going to see a lot of countries value that again, where 3 weeks ago, a month ago, like the tables were completely flipped, and our values were not for cohesiveness. It was like the more, difference of everything we can possibly have, the better it is. But you are seeing this fundamental swing of opinion and this swing of, I guess, practice, and it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes in the coming, weeks, months, and years.
Yeah, absolutely. Even my mom, bless her heart, she's an angel of a woman, but she came out with this punchline, and I always, it always struck me. And she was like, people at some point are going to go back to their roots. They're always going to. The world is kind of designed, in her view. She's kind of old school. She's been through a lot. She's seen quite a lot. She's seen different regimes. And my grandma was part of the British regime when they controlled India, for example. But she was like, at some point, people are going to go back to their respective lands. At some point, everybody's got their own place, and they're going to just go back to it. It's really hard to. The immigration and the emigration is all just monetary. It's all just for 3 reasons, right? Security, or better opportunity because you're coming from a failed homeland of yours. But now with the technology and with this abrupt, this crazy peak, the world getting smaller and all that, I think it was a little too quick. And now people are, and you see it a lot here in Norway. There's a lot, the right's in power now. They won re-election, and but it goes both ways. A proper, true immigrant should come and bring value. I mean, that's just how this works, right? And you don't have that now. You have a lot of immigrants that come here that leech off, or especially in the form of refugees and asylum seekers. You have a lot of them that from certain parts of the world, which I will not. I have no reason. I think people know which part of the world they come from. They come here, and they really are living large off of the generous welfare system. And that welfare system, I agree with, but it should be intended for those that really need it, and those that exploit it. What you have here, especially in the Scandinavian countries, is a lot of refugees that are not from the war-torn area. And there are a lot of men, between the ages of 18 and 35 that are single. I have no problems, and many Europeans now, and this has nothing to do with nationalism, but people that talk like me or share the same views like me are referred to as cruel, nationalistic, heathens or bigots. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. The whole world, it would be a lot better to see boats of women and children from these deprived countries to come to Europe. I'm sure everybody would open the floodgates for them, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing men, aggressive men, 18 to 35, who we do not know if they have any type of affiliation with, terroristic organizations, for example. And they're just coming here. They've set up a network. I mean, it's really, really alarming. Mm-hmm. And now because of the virus, that's all been shut down, and that's the excuse. But I'm telling you right now, a lot of these rich countries in the West, they're going to really use this virus to get the nationalism, to get that. We don't want anybody else coming in now because of the threat of spreading the disease. But in all actuality, they wanted this from the get-go.
Well, crises are often used to politically affect things that you wanted to put into place anyways. And, one thing that I think, as far as it comes to immigration is if you've traveled out there in the world, and unfortunately a lot of the people in the United States simply haven't traveled widely and broadly, but there's an unlimited number of people out there in desperate, terrible situations. I mean, billions and billions of people out there. And how you select people to come to your country, at least I believe, you can take someone that is in the most desolate of situations out of, pick any random country out there, and you bring him to the United States, and there's a sea of other people in exactly the same situation. You've changed nothing. And I think that, for people to come to any country, there should be two things that person wants. Number one, they should want to contribute to a society because of the skills, perspectives, whatever they have. They have something of value to that country. But the second thing is I think they really need to assimilate into the language, the culture, and just kind of, the mission of that particular country. Every country is different, and you can always find a country that agrees with your perspectives if you want to. So if you want to emigrate, find somewhere that is the type of country you want to live in. Don't go to a country and then try to change that country to be like the country that you just came from. I don't think that's... Yeah, right, exactly.
It's been a big problem, Gilman. And, I will say from my experience, I've dealt with plenty of racism in Norway just because of my skin color. And I tell these people, dude, I'm from the U.S. I'm an American. I'm as American as apple pie. They don't believe it. But then, Norway's a little bit different because of their history and the rough history that they've had. I still have a lot of respect for this country. I'm very happy to be here. I don't want to make any qualms or doubts about that. But the location where I'm at now, literally in the middle of Norway, is a little bit, it's very different. They're still stuck in the post-war era. Some of these towns, some of these villages, they're very, very, they're still in that mentality. But, after I learned the language, I can speak Norwegian, I can read, write, and speak it. It just opened up a whole other world, and I got so much respect and so much more comfortability with the local populace, and it really worked wonders. So that's an effort that immigrants have to put forth, even if you're coming from well-developed countries.
Sure.
And I do understand it's very difficult for those that are coming from lesser developed countries. But like you said, there's something about the culture, the mentality, the mindset of certain demographics, certain diasporas. People from India, whether we like them or not, we emigrate, or we've been emigrating for 50 years to the west from India. And we go to wherever we go, Australia, America, Canada, Britain, Norway, whatever. And we just settled down. And even now they did a statistic in Norway. The highest median income of any immigrant group is Indians. It's also the same thing in America. There's just certain cultures that, buckle down. We don't cause problems. We don't come in here and go for the easy, flashy dollar and
You're Indian, aren't you, as I recall?
Yeah, I am.
Are you first generation or are you second generation Indian?
First generation.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you've actually lived in another country then, and you've been through the whole process of growing up somewhere else and then moving for economic or for other reasons.
Only for a little bit. You could, it's debatable, but I didn't spend a lot of time. I've been in America for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, very easy for me because, my parents, they came and before they got situated, they had to go back. There was a little bit of immigration issues back in the 80s. It was very tough times. People during that economic crisis that America had, immigrants from India or even anywhere, just let alone India, even from Russia. If you had to have a master's degree, for example, or at least a bachelor's. Like you said, what are you bringing to the table? Back then, even if you had a bachelor's or a master's degree, you could maybe find a job as a janitor. That's just how it was. And it was bad because of the situation America was in, being in Vietnam, recovering from all that. But I know in Europe, certain countries have implemented that. You come here, you have to be very good. If you want to get a work visa, a work permit or something, you have to be bringing something to the table, whether it's an advanced degree, or a PhD or a master's degree or something. America has an issue with illegal immigration. It's very unique. The only other countries I think that have an issue similar to this, not in Europe, is maybe Turkey and India. India, because there's a lot of movement between the very poor countries like Bangladesh and Burma. A lot of those people have been fleeing to India for safety and for a little bit of economic movement. But in Turkey, just because it serves as the bridge between the Middle East and Europe, they've been hit hard with a lot of illegal immigration. It's always interesting to see how certain countries deal with it and how other countries deal with it. For example, how China deals with illegal immigration. But it's okay. It's because it's China. They're the big fish in the small pond. They can do whatever they want. But if America were to do that with this wall, or if Turkey were to do that, it's a double standard, and it's bad.
Well, I think that this whole situation is going to give us a lot to think about. It's giving us a lot of different perspectives, and I feel extremely hopeful for the future that, we're going to come through this, and that through it, as all countries, that we're just going to come together, all the citizens that live here, and we're going to figure out, a way to move forward with hopefully more harmony and unification than we have in the past. But I think that will wrap it up today, and I really wanted to thank you for coming on. Of course, stay in touch, keep us updated how things are going on in Norway, and we'll talk to you later, okay?
We'll be glad to do so. Y'all stay healthy and be safe.
Yeah, stay well. Thank you for listening to the Gilman Woolsey podcast. We hope you enjoyed our show. As always, if you have information that you would like to share with us, or if you would like to come on our show, please contact us at COVID at gilmanwoolsey.com. We're always looking for new perspectives and to get an idea of what's going on out there. Thank you. Have a good night and be safe.